Hello there guys, this is Christy Lewis from Dostoevsky in Space. And today I'm going to be talking to you about a problem that I've had since I was a kid, and really it showed up when I was a teenager in high school, and that is reading difficult things when you really are having trouble focusing. So this is just some tips and advice that I use in that situation and that you can totally use as well, and you can adapt them to your own needs. Not every one of these tips is going to work for you because a lot of us will have different triggers and things that bother us, and our problems will be different. So just suit this to your tastes and your experiences. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention that Murphy and Napier did a video about this recently, and it was very inspiring for me. Although we definitely have different issues when it comes to focus, I definitely thought it was really helpful, and I hope that it helped a lot of you too. And in fact, if you're watching this, I hope you've already seen that. You probably have. So my first tip is actually something that I learned from Jongho of ATEEZ. People from his company were writing in for advice to the members of ATEEZ, and he mentioned that somebody had written into him and said that I tend to get so much more done when I work at home at night than I do at the company during the daytime. And so he told that friend, try to identify what is destroying your workflow when you're at work and get rid of that thing, whatever it is, because the reason you're focusing better at night is because that thing that is disrupting your workflow is not bothering you at home when you are at home at night. And you really need your sleep in order to do your best work. So it's important to be able to work with the time that you have rather than having to work late into the night, which will make the problem worse. This is a really useful tip that I've used quite a few times. A lot of times, if I'm having trouble focusing on something, it might be because something else is distracting me or something else is taking away all desire to get my work done. So if the thing that I'm really trying to focus on is the priority here, I'm gonna have to get rid of the distraction. Even if it's something that I really care about, I'll have to put it in its place. And you might surprise yourself once you get rid of the distraction that you become really interested in whatever it is that you're working on. Everything can be interesting if you've given your mind the peace and the space to absorb it and get into a good workflow. If you have trouble identifying whatever the distraction is, just sit and think about it for a little while. What is it that you do or that you are around that causes your heart rate to accelerate? Maybe it makes your anxiety peak. Maybe it's the only thing that you feel like you enjoy in your whole day. Everything else seems washed out in comparison to this thing, which is a bright pop of color in your life. Or maybe it's just something that you're constantly thinking about. Like I said, it could be a source of anxiety. It shouldn't be too hard to identify. You'll have to learn how to think your way around that distraction. Can you go into the office early? Can you start your day a different way? Can you talk to somebody about it? Do you have a therapist? Come up with a strategy to get around that distraction. Next, if you're really struggling with whatever you're working on, especially a difficult book, give yourself time to adjust to the language and the style, or just the general situation that you're working in. A lot of times, our brains just take some time to adjust to a new situation, especially if it's not the one that we live in. It's like when you're learning a new language. You have to spend a lot of time just listening to that language before you really become familiar with it and before it becomes familiar to you. Tip number 3 is if you're reading a book, listen to an audiobook or have your iPad read to you. And if you're trying to read something for work, you can also have your iPad read to you. I think you can also do this on some phones, but I've never been able to do it on my Android, so maybe it's an Apple product thing. This is something I used to use when I was critiquing stories of my critique partners when I was writing a lot. I would have my iPad read their stories to me so that I could get through them more quickly, and it really helped with my productivity. Sometimes all you need is a little help at the beginning of your work session or your study session. If you're working with a textbook, see if you can get an ebook copy of it, or if there's an audiobook copy available. At the very last resort, there are accessibility settings with whatever device you're working on because people with impaired sight also need to read. Sometimes just hearing it will make it a lot more comprehensible to you if your brain is going a million miles a minute and you cannot slow it down to actually focus on the words on the page. My tip number 4 is to start the day off with something quiet and a little bit difficult, probably more difficult than whatever you have planned out for the day. For me, this is Bible study. I always carve some time out at the beginning of the day before my brain has really fully woken up, because if my brain hasn't fully woken up yet, it's not going a million miles a minute. It's going at a slower pace, and it can take time to savor each word of the project that I'm working on, and I get into a workflow much more quickly. I know some people talk about meditation being something like this, and there could be a million projects that do this for you. Something that makes you feel powerful rather than scattered. That's what you're looking for. Something that makes you feel in control and calm. Consider doing this hard thing, whatever it is, before you start having caffeine for the day. That way, when you start having caffeine, it won't make you scattered. It'll help you have better focus because you'll already have established that this is going to be a good focus day for me. I've also found that if I start the day off doing something hard, my brain is adjusted to working hard. And I have set the expectation for the day that I'm going to be doing something hard today, so I need to focus. And kind of like I was talking about before, how you adjust to whatever project you're working on, your brain will also adjust to the level of difficulty. My next tip is to take a break when you switch projects. Go for a walk, eat your breakfast or your lunch, exercise or do some chores while you're listening to a podcast or praying. When you come back to the hard work projects that you have laid out for the day, you'll be refreshed. My next tip is to delete social media. If you are constantly feeling the desire to reach for your phone and post something on social media, you may not always have that problem. I find that some days it's there and some days it's not a problem at all. If I've had problems the several days before with my social media, I'll just delete my social media until I'm through my morning work. And then by the afternoon, I'm much less scattered and I can just enjoy it on my lunch break or whatever. A lot of times I will screenshot or save notes of what I want to say on social media so that I'll be able to just post it later when I have some time. Another tip is to join reading or productivity sprints. There's like always sprints happening here on YouTube. That's one of the wonderful things about BookTube, but also just YouTube in general does a lot of productivity sprints. It sometimes may feel more social to you, but even just joining for a sprint or two can really help you get your brain in gear. Even if you don't continue reading or working on your project right away after the sprints, just the fact that you've started will prime your brain for when you're ready to get started again, because you'll have already introduced it to that environment that day. And with that in mind, whenever you switch products, realize that your brain is having to adjust from thing to thing. So that's naturally going to be difficult. If you're on a roll with a project, try to finish it before moving on to the next thing. If you're reading a book, get to a good healthy percentage of the way through the book before you put it down again. And that goes from day to day. Anytime you're starting the day anew, you're going to have to reintroduce your brain to the projects that you're working on. So keep that in mind. If you can finish something on one day, try to get it done. That way the next day you can just move on to your next project. My next tip is that anything can be interesting if you immerse yourself in it. But just because it's interesting, it still may not be for you. If you have a choice in the matter, go for what your passion is calling you to. It doesn't have to be a permanent DNF of this project or book. You might come back to it later when you're more in the mood. But the most important thing is following your passions and not someone else's, if you have a choice in the matter. My final tip is, if you're just having a really bad focus day and it's just stressing you out to try to work on a particularly difficult project, this used to happen to me a lot when I was in school. Take a break and do something that you can do well. This will establish some confidence and it'll help you focus and relax because you're doing something you enjoy. Then get back to the studying. If you can, just focus on what you're good at that day. I find that if I'm having a really bad focus day and I can't seem to get any work done, I tend to be more social on those days. So I decide I'll answer comments. Or I have more energy for filming than I would on a day when I've spent the whole day really focusing hard on a book or a project. Or I work on editing, which doesn't require a lot of focus. So if you can, always try to use your good focus days to work on your hardest projects so that if you're having a bad focus day, you're not going to feel like you procrastinated and now you're in a rush. So you have to work regardless of your focus. That's the end of my tips. I hope this video helped you out and let me know down below if you have any tips of your own. Take care and I'll talk to you next time. Bye-bye.